Most investors fail not because the market turns against them, but because they can't master the emotions raging inside their own minds. That's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to hear at investment seminars or from their financial advisors. But it's the truth that separates those who build lasting wealth from those who chase it their entire lives and never quite catch up. If you've found value in what we're exploring here today, go ahead and subscribe. This channel is dedicated to timeless financial wisdom, the kind that actually works when the headlines scream panic and when your neighbor is bragging about doubling his money in 3 months. We're here for the long game, and so should you be now. Most people believe their money problems stem from bad investments, from picking the wrong stock at the wrong time, or from missing out on the next big thing. They don't. Money problems come from bad psychology, from the inability to sit still when sitting still is exactly what's required. Markets have always moved up and down. That's simply their nature, their rhythm, their way of functioning in a world full of uncertainty. But people, well, people go insane. They panic when they should be calm. They chase excitement when they should embrace boredom. They buy at the peak when everything feels euphoric and sell at the bottom when fear grips their chest like a vice. Then they call this pattern a strategy, as if chaos wrapped in vocabulary somehow becomes wisdom. Let me tell you something that might sting a little. The biggest threat to your wealth isn't inflation eating away at your purchasing power over decades. It's not taxation, though the government will certainly take its share. It's not even recessions, those inevitable downturns that shake out the weak hands and test everyone's resolve. The biggest threat to your wealth is you. It's your ego whispering that you're smarter than the crowd. It's your envy corroding your judgment when someone else gets rich faster. It's your impatience, that gnawing feeling that time is running out and you need to act now, right now, before the opportunity disappears forever. The market cannot destroy you unless you first destroy yourself from the inside, brick by brick, decision by decision. When Charlie Munger was younger, he thought intelligence would save him. It didn't. The financial graveyards are filled with brilliant people who lost their tempers, lost their discipline, and eventually lost their shirts. The smarter they were, the dumber their behavior became, because intelligence breeds a dangerous kind of confidence. Smart people believe they can outthink the crowd, predict the unpredictable, and dance between the raindrops without getting wet. The market has a special way of humiliating people who think they're clever. It waits patiently, letting them feel invincible. And then it teaches them a lesson they'll never forget. What's the biggest financial mistake you've learned from so far? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else avoid the same trap. What actually works in investing isn't brilliance or genius level IQ. It's temperament. It's the ability to stay calm when everyone around you is panicking, selling everything they own because the news says the world is ending. It's staying rational when others are chasing the next miracle, the next cryptocurrency with a dog logo, the next revolutionary company that promises to change everything. Most people don't realize it, but investing is fundamentally a psychological endurance test disguised as a math problem. You win not by predicting the next market move, which is impossible anyway, but by surviving your own impulses long enough to benefit from compound interest. That patient, invisible force that turns modest savings into genuine wealth over years and decades. Yet survival is exactly what most people fail at. They can't stand boredom. They genuinely cannot tolerate watching their portfolio sit there, day after day, doing nothing particularly exciting. They can't resist excitement, that dopamine rush of action, a feeling like they're doing something important. They mistake activity for progress, trading constantly, reading every news headline, checking their account balance multiple times per day. They end up broke with entertaining stories instead of actual returns. Show me someone who can sit quietly while their neighbor gets rich quick on some speculative investment, and I'll show you someone who will stay rich for life. Because money doesn't reward intelligence. Not really. It rewards emotional stability. It rewards the capacity to do nothing when nothing is the smartest move. Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing, said something profound that most investors never truly absorb. He said the market is a voting machine in the short run and a weighing machine in the long run. In other words, prices bounce around based on emotion and popularity in the near term. But eventually, reality asserts itself. Quality wins. Patience wins. The problem is that most people never live long enough in their portfolio to see that weighing happen. They panic and jump off the scale the moment it tilts against them. You can't fix that problem with an MBA from Harvard or a sophisticated spreadsheet model. That's a character problem, not an IQ problem. And character doesn't compound automatically like capital does. Character is built the hard way, through enduring discomfort without doing something stupid in response. So when people ask for the secret to investing, Charlie Munger tells them something they never like hearing. The secret is learning not to react, not to noise, not to fads, not to the envy that burns when your brother-in-law brags about his latest winning trade. Everyone wants to act, to feel productive, to justify their existence by making moves. Few have the discipline to sit, and fewer still can sit without resentment while others appear to get richer first. That's why the psychology of money isn't really about finance at all. It's about human nature, and human nature doesn't change, no matter how many books you read or podcasts you consume. Greed, fear, envy, these are ancient forces, hardwired into our brains over millions of years of evolution. You can't erase them. You can only outsmart them by recognizing when they're influencing your decisions. Here's the first rule of money that nobody teaches in school. Don't trust yourself too much. When you think you're being perfectly rational, analyzing the situation logically, and making a sound decision, check again. You're probably being emotional with better vocabulary, dressing up your fear or greed in sophisticated language that makes it sound reasonable. If you can understand that simple fact, you've already beaten 90% of investors, because the rest are still trying to win a psychological war with a calculator. If you want to understand why people go broke, truly broke despite having opportunities and resources, don't study economics textbooks. Study psychology. Humans evolved to survive the jungle, not to navigate the stock market. Our brains are built for instant reaction, for responding immediately to threats and opportunities. Back in the caves, if you saw a tiger, you ran without thinking. If you found food, you ate it immediately because you didn't know when the next meal would come. That wiring kept our ancestors alive. Now it makes you buy high and sell low. Fear and greed, the two oldest forces in the world, still drive 99% of financial behavior. It's not that people don't know what to do. Most investors can recite the basic principles. They just can't actually do it when their emotions are screaming at them to act. Charlie Munger watched investors sit on gold mines and still find ways to panic themselves out of positions that would have made them wealthy. The stock drops 10%, which is completely normal volatility, and they act like it's the end of civilization, like they need to sell immediately before they lose everything. Meanwhile, the patient investor quietly gets rich doing nothing, simply holding on while everyone else loses their nerve. Munger once said the first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. But that's exactly what people do. They interrupt their own success because boredom feels unbearable. They can't leave well enough alone. They need action, movement, the feeling that they're optimizing and improving their position. Envy makes everything worse. Your neighbor makes money faster than you, doubles his investment in 6 months while yours has gained maybe 15% over a year. Suddenly your own solid plan feels stupid, inadequate, embarrassing. So you abandon it and copy him. usually right before his luck runs out and the whole thing collapses. Envy is the one emotion that doesn't even give you pleasure while you're experiencing it. It just eats you from the inside while you pretend to be making rational decisions. It's a guaranteed way to destroy both your peace of mind and your portfolio. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger watched this pattern unfold 1,000 times. Over their decades of investing, a man buys a great business at a reasonable price, a company with solid fundamentals and good long-term prospects. Then he sells it because someone else doubled their money faster on some speculative play. He trades a lifetime of wealth for a moment of feeling superior, of not being the fool who missed out. That's not investing. That's monkey behavior dressed in a business suit. You can't reason with envy because it's not logical. It's biological, an evolutionary instinct that made sense in small tribes but destroys financial judgment in modern markets. That's why Munger calls it the monkey in the mirror. No matter how old you get, no matter how educated or experienced, that monkey is still there, grinning back at you, daring you to do something stupid. Most people lose money not because they're unlucky or because the market is rigged against them. They lose because they can't tell when they're being driven by that primitive monkey brain. They think they're making bold, intelligent moves. In reality, they're gambling with their future because someone else looks richer today, and they can't stand it. Make sure you're subscribed, because we're about to go deeper into how the wealthiest investors actually think. And it's nothing like what Wall Street wants you to believe. The irony is that the market eventually punishes both fear and greed, just at different times in different ways. When you're greedy, prices are already high, elevated by everyone else's optimism and excitement. When you're fearful, prices are low, beaten down by everyone else's panic and despair. So most investors spend their entire lives doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, for the wrong reasons, buying expensive assets and selling cheap ones in an endless cycle of financial self-destructs. The smart investor understands this cycle and refuses to play the game on those terms. He accepts volatility as the price of admission, the cost you pay for the opportunity to build real wealth. He accepts boredom as the cost of wealth, understanding that watching paint dry is more profitable than constant activity. That's not easy, but it is simple. The trick is to stay sane when everyone else loses their mind. When the headlines scream crisis and your friends are either euphoric or suicidal about their portfolios. That requires emotional distance, the ability to look at your own reactions and say calmly, "Ah, that's the monkey again. That's just fear talking. That's just greed whispering." Someone once said that the market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient. That's not just clever wordplay. It's painfully, brutally accurate. If you can resist greed when everyone is euphoric, convinced that prices will rise forever, and resist fear when everyone is terrified, certain that the world is ending, you'll win a game most people don't even know they're playing. But most people can't do that, because it's not fun to look stupid in the short term, even if it makes you rich in the long term. Nobody wants to be the person at the party, explaining why they're not invested in whatever bubble is currently inflating. It's socially awkward. It feels isolating. So they go along with the crowd, and the crowd eventually leads them off a cliff. In the end, successful investing isn't about brilliance or having access to secret information. It's about mastering the primitive animal inside you, recognizing its impulses without obeying them. That's the hardest work there is, because that animal never leaves. It just gets quieter when you learn to stop feeding it. When you stop rewarding its demands for immediate action and emotional satisfaction. Which of Munger's principles do you find hardest to practice in your own life? Let's discuss in the comments. We're all learning together. So next time you feel that urgent need to act, to do something with your portfolio right now, don't ask yourself what the market is doing. Ask yourself what your brain is doing. Because that, not the S&P 500, is what actually decides your financial fate. Your brain, your emotions, your discipline, these are the variables that matter most. People dramatically overestimate the importance of intelligence in investing. They think success comes from being smart, from having advanced degrees and understanding complex financial models. It doesn't work that way. If intelligence alone produced wealth, every PhD in economics would be a billionaire, and every professor would retire rich. Wall Street is absolutely filled with high IQ people who can price derivatives in their sleep, who understand portfolio theory and efficient market hypotheses, but who can't sit still for 6 months without touching their investments. They know everything except how to behave properly when their emotions are tested. Munger said it plainly. A lot of brilliant people are absolutely hopeless at making money. They can recite economic theories and cite academic studies, but they can't resist the urge to act when they should be sitting on their hands, waiting patiently for their thesis to play out. The problem isn't lack of information or analytical capability. It's the illusion of control, the belief that superior intelligence translates into the ability to control outcomes. The smarter you are, the harder it becomes to accept that you can't outsmart randomness. That much of what happens in markets is simply unpredictable noise. Smart people think they can predict the unpredictable, manage the unmanageable, dominate forces far larger than themselves. Then the market humbles them, sometimes gently, often brutally. Markets don't care about your IQ, your credentials, or how impressive your Excel model looks. They only care about your behavior when things get ugly. When your portfolio is down 30% and the headlines are predicting another Great Depression. Charlie Munger remembers the 1970s vividly, a period when inflation was running wild and respected experts were saying American capitalism was finished, that the golden age was over. Every economist had a new theory to explain the crisis. Most of them went broke, not because their theories were wrong, but because they couldn't admit they didn't really know what would happen next. They made confident predictions and bet accordingly, and they paid dearly for their overconfidence. Munger and Buffett made plenty of mistakes too, but they never pretended to understand more than they actually did. They stayed within their circle of competence, focusing on businesses they genuinely understood, and ignored the noise from experts who claimed to have it all figured out. That's what intelligence really means in investing, knowing where your intelligence stops, recognizing the boundaries of your competence and staying inside them. If you need a formula for investment success, here it is in 3 words. Temperament beats IQ. Always, because discipline doesn't panic when the market crashes. Intelligence without humility leads to arrogance. And arrogance is just ignorance wearing expensive clothing and speaking with unearned confidence. Munger saw fund managers who were mathematical geniuses, people who could solve complex equations in their heads. Yet, they blew up their entire funds in a single year. Why? They were too smart to follow simple rules. They thought this time was different, that their brilliance exempted them from the old lessons of history. It never is different. The details change, but the fundamentals remain constant. The market punishes people who believe they're special, that they've discovered something nobody else understands. It rewards those who accept they're not special, that they're just one more participant in the game where humility and patience matter more than genius. There's a reason Buffett says they don't look for 7-foot geniuses to invest with or hire. They look for people with ordinary intelligence and uncommon discipline. People who can follow a simple plan consistently over decades. That's because discipline scales across any market condition. Intelligence doesn't scale the same way. A smart person makes smart decisions, but a disciplined person makes the right decisions even when they're difficult. Even when the smart-seeming thing is actually emotional rationalization. The truth is that money flows toward sanity, toward people who can think clearly when everyone else is emotional and confused. That doesn't require brilliance. It requires control, the boring, unglamorous ability to stick with a plan when sticking with it feels foolish. Control is boring, which is exactly why it's rare. If you want excitement, entertainment, and stories to tell at dinner parties, go to Las Vegas. If you want actual wealth that lasts and grows and provides real security, learn to be dull. Learn to find satisfaction in consistency rather than drama. Boring compounds. Excitement evaporates. Hit that subscribe button now, because what comes next reveals how the wealthiest minds in history avoided the traps that catch everyone else. People don't want to hear that building wealth is boring, because it sounds unheroic, unglamorous, completely at odds with how investing is portrayed in movies and media. They'd rather believe there's some secret formula, some insider system that the wealthy use but don't share. There isn't. There's just patience in the conspicuous absence of stupidity. And the absence of stupidity, unfortunately, looks a lot like nothing is happening. You're not trading, not reacting to news, not making bold moves that feel impressive. You're just sitting there, reading annual reports and waiting. That's why so few people practice it consistently. It doesn't feel like enough. The world doesn't reward brilliance nearly as much as people think. It rewards endurance, the capacity to survive your own emotions long enough for compound interest to work. It's mathematical magic. If you can survive your own impulses, your own fears and greeds and envies, the math will eventually take care of the rest. The numbers will compound, the good businesses will grow, and you wake up one day substantially wealthier than when you started. So if you're young and you think you're smarter than the market, here's a piece of advice from an old man who's seen it all. You're not smarter than the market. Nobody is. The sooner you accept that humbling truth, the richer you'll become. Because you'll stop fighting a battle you cannot win and start playing a game you can actually master. Tell me in the comments, what principle from this lesson will you apply starting today? What's one behavior you're committed to changing? The lesson is simple, though never easy to actually practice. If you need constant reassurance from others, if your investment decisions depend on the approval of the herd, you're already finished. Because the moment your opinions depend on social validation, you've handed control of your financial fate to people who don't care about your future. In markets, independence isn't just a personality trait. It's a survival skill. You have to think for yourself and endure being misunderstood for extended periods. Every great investor Munger ever met had one thing in common. They were willing to look wrong before they eventually looked right. That's not courage in any dramatic sense. That's just sanity in disguise. The ability to trust your own analysis and wait for reality to catch up. People don't get destroyed by volatility, by the normal up and down movement of asset prices. They get destroyed by conformity, by the overwhelming need to agree with the crowd and avoid looking foolish in front of others. They want certainty in a world that doesn't offer any. So they follow the loudest voice, the most confident expert, the friend who seems to have it figured out. They follow until that voice leads them straight off a cliff. The sad part is that even after the crash, after they've lost substantial amounts of money, they'll tell themselves they couldn't have seen it coming, that nobody could have predicted it, but they could have. They just didn't want to look uncool by standing still while others ran toward the edge. One of the most dangerous delusions in money, one of the beliefs that destroys more wealth than almost anything else, is the conviction that you're in control. You're not in control. Not over markets, not over timing, and often not even over yourself. The human brain evolved to hate uncertainty, so it invents patterns where none exist and calls it analysis, expertise, insight. We build elaborate models and charts and narratives just to feel a little less helpless in the face of randomness. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of what happens in markets is random noise, dressed up as meaningful information. Most of what people call skill is actually luck with a good public relations agent. It's deeply uncomfortable to admit that, so people pretend their forecasts matter, that their predictions have value. They don't. If you can't reliably predict your own mood tomorrow morning, how can you possibly predict global economics for the next decade? Munger once said that if you think you can predict the market consistently, you're either a fool or a liar. And most of Wall Street is a clever combination of both. He's seen fund managers who would rather be wrong with the crowd than right alone, because being wrong with everyone else is socially acceptable, while being right by yourself is isolating. They run computer models with 6 decimal places of precision, but they can't make one good decision when real fear sets in and their emotions override everything. You can't spreadsheet human emotion. You can't model panic or euphoria with any reliability. You can only understand these forces and prepare yourself psychologically to handle them when they arrive. That's why the Munger-Buffett approach was always built on simplicity. Find a good business with sustainable competitive advantages. Buy it at a reasonable price and hold it while everyone else loses their nerve and sells. That's not glamorous. Doesn't make for exciting dinner conversation, but it works because it sidesteps the illusion of control entirely. The market is going to do whatever it wants regardless of your opinions. Your only job is not to predict its movements, but to endure them without making catastrophic mistakes. When Munger looks back at all the times he could have acted smarter, made some clever move that seemed obvious in hindsight, he realizes that doing absolutely nothing was almost always the better choice. The fewer decisions you make, the fewer mistakes you make. In investing, avoiding stupidity is a far superior strategy to chasing brilliance. But people hate hearing that. They want action, not restraint. They want to feel in control, even if that control is completely illusory. So they trade constantly, trying to optimize every possible edge. They chase signals in the noise. They read financial news as if it contains divine wisdom, when mostly it exists to fill space between advertisements. The world doesn't reward movement. It rewards correct behavior sustained consistently over long periods of time. And behavior is just another word for psychology. If you can't sit still, you'll pay for that restlessness, usually in dollars, sometimes in dignity and reputation. When Munger and Buffett buy something, they don't stare at stock tickers all day watching every fluctuation. They read, they think deeply, they wait patiently. That's how you turn time into money, by being patient enough to let it work for you. But that kind of patience feels unbearable to most people. They'd rather pretend they can control outcomes than admit they can only control themselves, their own behavior and responses. Here's a useful thought experiment. If the stock market shut down completely for 5 years, would you still be comfortable holding what you currently own? If the answer is no, if you'd be anxious not knowing the current price, you don't own an investment. You own a distraction, a source of anxiety disguised as an asset. The illusion of control is seductive because it flatters the ego, makes you feel smart and capable and proactive. But ego is what ruins investors over and over again. It whispers that you're smarter than average, faster than the crowd, different from everyone else who lost money making that same mistake. Then it hands you the rope to hang yourself with. You don't beat markets by predicting them accurately and consistently. You survive them by adapting to your own psychology, by staying calm when chaos hits and refusing to play games you don't genuinely understand. That's not luck. That's wisdom earned the hard way, by being wrong enough times to finally stop pretending you're in charge of forces beyond your control. Everyone wants to be rich. Absolutely everyone fantasizes about financial freedom and security, but no one wants to suffer for it, to endure the psychological discomfort that wealth actually demands. That's why so few people stay wealthy once they achieve it. They can't handle the ongoing emotional cost of maintaining discipline. when discipline no longer feels necessary. The truth about money is deceptively simple. Getting rich is hard, but staying rich is significantly harder, because wealth demands a level of discipline and restraint that most people only possess during poverty. When you're broke, you're forced to be cautious by circumstances. Every dollar matters. Every decision carries weight. When you're rich, you start believing you're bulletproof, that the rules somehow don't apply to you anymore. That's when reality hands you the invoice for your overconfidence. Munger watched this pattern repeat itself throughout his long career. People win, achieve financial success, then promptly forget how they won. They start chasing new thrills, new deals, new toys and status symbols. They mistake motion for progress. They forget that compounding only works if you don't interrupt it through stupidity or impatience. Every fortune eventually meets its ultimate test, not from external market forces, but from the owner's own psychology. When you have more money than you immediately need for survival and comfort, the real challenge becomes not losing your sense, not letting success breed the arrogance that destroys it. Make no mistake, markets will test you repeatedly. They'll shake your faith, mock your patience, and seduce you with shortcuts that look clever, but slowly rot your discipline from the inside. Most people can't emotionally stand watching their net worth fall by 30%, even temporarily. But that's the entry fee for long-term wealth. You don't get rich without experiencing volatility. You just decide whether you'll pay for it with temporary discomfort or permanent stupidity. Discomfort eventually passes. Stupidity compounds in the wrong direction. The problem is that people confuse temporary pain with permanent loss. They sell great businesses because the stock price fell, which is like divorcing your spouse because they caught a cold. The business fundamentals haven't changed, but the price has. And price is all most investors can see. Pain is part of the process. It's the market's way of checking who actually deserves the reward. Who has the stomach to hold on when holding on feels foolish? Munger remembers the 1970s when inflation and pessimism ruled the developed world. Stocks were cheap because almost nobody wanted them. Fear was universal. He and Buffett bought when others despaired, not because they enjoyed suffering or had some masochistic streak, but because they trusted arithmetic more than emotion. They knew that good businesses bought at reasonable prices would eventually produce good returns. Regardless of the current mood that years later, everyone called it brilliant timing. Perfect market sense. It wasn't timing at all. It was tolerance for pain. The capacity to endure significant discomfort while everyone else panicked and sold. The capacity to endure that discomfort is what definitively separates the investor from the speculator. The speculator wants dopamine, wants the high of quick gains and exciting action. The investor wants peace, the calm that comes from knowing your approach is sound even when results are temporarily disappointing. And peace doesn't come from predicting the future, which is impossible anyway. It comes from accepting that you can't predict it and surviving anyway through discipline. There's a reason Munger and Buffett hold businesses they understand deeply, rather than chasing whatever is hot. They'd rather suffer through temporary declines in things they comprehend, than panic out of positions due to ignorance. Because ignorance in investing is the most expensive pain of all. The irony is that pain properly endured becomes a compounding force of its own. Each market crash you survive without panicking makes you stronger and calmer for the next one. Builds your psychological capital alongside your financial capital. But if you run at the first sign of discomfort, you'll never stay in the game long enough to actually win. That's why Munger often says the world isn't destroyed by volatility itself. It's destroyed by people who can't handle volatility, who sell at exactly the wrong moment because they can't tolerate the emotional distress. If you can't emotionally tolerate seeing your portfolio drop 50% without abandoning your plan, you genuinely don't deserve the long-term return of equities. It's that simple and that harsh. So when people ask how to become rich, Munger tells them something that sounds almost absurd. Learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Learn to sit still while the world screams that you should do something. Learn to ignore the noise, the envy, the fear that everyone else seems to be feeling. That's the real tuition for wealth, far more valuable than any MBA, because in the end, the market doesn't reward the smartest or the fastest. It rewards the person who can suffer wisely and remain standing when everyone else has run for cover. If you've gotten this far, you're already thinking differently than most investors. Subscribe and turn on notifications. This is exactly the kind of wisdom that compounds over time. Patience sounds boring, and that's exactly why it works so powerfully in markets designed to transfer wealth. From the active to the patient are always in short supply because patience doesn't feel productive. Everyone loves the idea of compounding, of returns building on returns effortlessly over time. But nobody actually wants to wait for it. They love the concept until they realize time moves slowly, that years stretch out uncomfortably when you're waiting for results. In an age where people measure attention spans in seconds, where streaming services and social media provide instant gratification constantly, waiting years for investment results feels like punishment, like you're somehow doing it wrong. But wealth doesn't grow on your schedule or according to your emotional needs. It grows on the market schedule, on the timeline of business cycles and economic reality. And the market doesn't care at all how bored or impatient you are. Munger often said that the big money is not in the buying or the selling, but in the waiting. That's a sentence most people hear, but very few truly understand at a deep level. Waiting doesn't mean doing literally nothing. It means resisting stupidity while time compounds your sanity and your capital. You sit on good businesses. You ignore the constant noise. You let arithmetic perform its quiet, invisible miracle. Most investors don't lose money because they had fundamentally bad ideas about what to buy. They lose because they couldn't wait long enough for genuinely good ideas to work, to reach their full potential. It's like planting a tree and then digging it up every few weeks to check if the roots are growing, constantly disturbing the soil and preventing the very growth you're hoping to see. That's not investing. That's financial gardening with a shovel in each hand and anxiety in your heart. Patience requires faith, but not blind faith in the market or in any particular company. It requires faith in your own process, in the soundness of your approach. You have to believe in arithmetic more than emotion, in time more than timing. Munger and Buffett once waited over 20 years for some investments to deliver their full value. Try explaining that to a generation that gets genuinely angry when an Amazon package arrives a day late. That's the real psychological challenge of modern investing. Learning to be at peace with slowness in a world that glorifies speed. You can't rush compounding any more than you can rush the seasons. Spring doesn't arrive faster because you're impatient for winter to end. You can only avoid interrupting the natural process, and that requires genuine emotional strength, because during those long years of waiting, the world will constantly tempt you to move. There will be bubbles that look irresistible. There will be crashes that feel like the end of everything. There will be new paradigms proclaimed by experts, new technologies that promise to change everything forever. There will be talking heads on television shouting predictions like preachers at a carnival. The patient investor learns to smile politely at all of it and do nothing, because action is often the enemy of good outcomes. When you finally understand that patience stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like a weapon, a competitive advantage that others simply can't replicate because they don't even recognize it as an advantage. In markets, most people think speed creates wealth, that you need to be quick and nimble and constantly reacting. It doesn't work that way. Stillness creates wealth. Stillness allows compounding to do its quiet, powerful work while the impatient burn through their capital chasing shortcuts that don't actually exist. If you want an easy filter for future investment success, ask yourself this honestly. Can I wait a decade without losing faith in my approach? If the answer is no, if you need validation or results sooner than that, then the market will eventually take your money and give it to someone who answered yes. Someone with a longer time horizon and more emotional stability. Patience properly understood isn't laziness or passivity. It's strategic inactivity, the conscious discipline of letting time do what your impulses cannot. So yes, patience is boring. There's no denying that. But boredom is dramatically underrated in investing. It's the quiet space where wealth actually grows, where mathematical laws operate without interference. It's also where fools lose interest and move on to something more stimulating, leaving the field open for those with the temperament to stay. The secret is genuinely simple. If you can learn to enjoy the waiting, to find satisfaction in the process rather than just the outcome, you'll eventually own everything the impatient once desired, but couldn't hold on to long enough to keep. Charlie Munger lived nearly a century, witnessed countless market cycles, and learned lessons that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. If there's one final truth he wanted people to understand, it's this: your behavior matters infinitely more than your brain, because behavior is the bridge between knowledge and results. And most people burn that bridge with emotion before they ever cross it. The market will always test you. It will tempt you when you should be cautious and scare you when you should be calm. If you don't know who you are before the storm arrives, you'll find out the hard way when it hits. The wise investor accepts that imperfection is permanent, that you'll never eliminate fear or greed or envy from your psychological makeup. You just learn to observe them without automatically obeying them. That's what maturity looks like in finance, not certainty, but composure. If you can stay rational when the entire world loses its mind, you'll eventually own a significant piece of that world. The irony of money is that once you understand it deeply enough, you stop being obsessed with it. You realize that the true purpose of wealth is freedom, not display. Security, not status. The peace of mind that comes from knowing you can handle whatever comes is worth more than any material possession. In the end, the psychology of money works like this. You learn over time to detach your self-worth from your net worth. You stop reacting to noise and start thinking independently. You make peace with the idea that getting rich slowly is still the fastest way that actually works. It sounds simple when reduced to a few sentences, but it's the hardest thing in the world to practice consistently, because it requires you to win a war not against the market or the economy, or your neighbor's success, but against yourself. And that's the one war most people never even realize they're fighting until they've already lost it. So if you take just one lesson from a long life spent watching fortunes made and lost, watching brilliant people fail and ordinary people succeed, let it be this: the market isn't your enemy. The economy isn't your enemy. Your neighbor's success isn't your enemy. Your own psychology is. Control it, understand it, work with it rather than against it, and you never need luck. You'll have something far more valuable: the temperament to survive and eventually thrive, regardless of external circumstances. That final question: what's one specific action you're taking this week to improve your financial psychology? Share it in the comments. Your commitment might inspire someone else to start their own journey. If you really want to make yourself miserable, Charlie Munger used to say with his characteristic dry wit, don't smoke or drink or gamble. Just start comparing yourself to others. Envy is the deadliest sin in investing, not because it kills your portfolio quickly in one dramatic explosion, but because it eats away at your peace slowly, methodically, day after day. It's also the most pointless sin because there's absolutely no pleasure in it. At least gluttony tastes good while you're indulging. Greed feels exciting for a while, gives you a rush. Envy just burns your insides while you smile politely in public, pretending everything is fine. Munger saw men with $100 million feel genuinely poor because someone else made $100 million. That's not poverty in any real sense. That's pathology, a sickness of perspective that no amount of money can cure. The world constantly throws envy in your face if you're paying attention. Your neighbor buys a new car, something sleek and expensive that makes your reliable sedan look shabby. Your colleague doubles his income with a job change. Some person online claims to have made 10,000% returns on the cryptocurrency with a cartoon dog as its logo. And suddenly you're sensible. Steady life feels like failure. Like you're somehow losing a race you didn't even know you'd entered. That's the psychology of money at its absolute worst. It tricks you into measuring yourself by other people's scoreboard instead of your own. Once you start doing that, once you let external comparisons dictate your sense of success, you've already lost the game. You stop asking the most important question, what's enough for me? What do I actually need to be happy and secure? Instead, you start asking, why not me? Why is he getting rich and I'm not? That's when greed disguises itself as ambition. When envy wraps itself in the language of goals and aspiration. Common sense goes out the window, replaced by a desperate need to keep up. Munger never saw anyone go broke from underestimating envy's power. It's everywhere once you start looking for it. In boardrooms where executives compare bonuses. In neighborhoods where house sizes become a competition. In marriages where one spouse resents the other's career success. It's the invisible tax on happiness that compounds negatively over time. Envy leads directly to dumb behavior because it fundamentally distorts your perception of reality. You stop thinking in absolute terms about what you have and need. You start thinking in relative terms, comparing yourself to everyone around you. You don't care about earning a solid 10% return. You care that your friend earned 12%, that he's somehow beating you in a competition that exists only in your mind. The problem with that approach is you can never win that game. Never. There's always someone richer, someone luckier, someone with a louder voice telling everyone how well they're doing. If envy were an actual contest, the grand prize would be endless frustration and psychological torment. Munger learned early in life that everything gets easier when you admire people. Instead of envying them, admiration is fuel for improvement. It pushes you to learn, to grow, to become better than your past self. It's productive and healthy. Envy just corrodes your ability to think clearly, to make sound decisions based on your actual circumstances, rather than someone else's apparent success. When Munger and Buffett built Berkshire Hathaway over decades, they weren't trying to be richer than anyone else, weren't competing with other investors or keeping score against their peers. They were trying to be wiser than their past selves, to make fewer mistakes this year than last year. That's a much saner competition because it's the only one you can actually win. You have control over your own improvement. You have zero control over what others achieve. You'll never master money until you master the psychology of comparison. The world desperately wants you to believe wealth is a race with clear winners and losers, that you need to beat everyone else to be successful. But it's not a race at all. It's a quiet, private game between your patience and your impulses, between your long-term thinking and your short-term desires. Envy is the impulse that breaks the silence, that interrupts your rational thinking. It whispers constantly, do something, act now. Don't let them get ahead of you. So you chase fads you don't understand. You take risks that don't match your actual goals or risk tolerance. You abandon sound strategies because someone else is making money faster with a different approach. And you end up exactly where you started, only angrier, more frustrated, more convinced the game is rigged against you. The cure for envy is simple to state, but difficult to practice. Learn to be content, not complacent, but content. Know what enough looks like for your specific situation and have the courage to stop running. Once you reach it, if you don't define your own finish line, You'll spend your entire life climbing ladders leaned against the wrong walls. By the time you realize you've been chasing someone else's definition of success, you'll be too exhausted to climb back down and start over. Envy is the one emotion that absolutely guarantees you never enjoy your success. No matter how much you accumulate, you could have everything you ever wanted and still feel poor because someone somewhere has more. So if you genuinely want peace of mind with your money, start by killing envy. Do it quickly, decisively, before it kills your judgment, your joy, and your sanity. Because in the end, it's infinitely better to be reasonably rich and genuinely content than spectacularly rich and perpetually miserable, always looking over your shoulder as someone who has more. People absolutely love to complicate simple things. Complexity makes them feel intelligent, sophisticated, like they're operating on a higher level than everyone else. But in money, just like in life, complexity is usually just a disguise for confusion, a way to hide the fact that you don't really understand what you're doing. The truth about building wealth has always come from the same few fundamental principles, and they haven't changed in centuries. Spend less than you earn. Invest the difference wisely. Don't interrupt the compounding process with stupid decisions. That's it. That's the entire formula reduced to 3 simple ideas. But try telling that to someone looking for excitement, for the secret sauce that separates billionaires from everyone else. They won't believe you. Most investors genuinely can't stand simplicity because it feels too plain to be profound, too obvious to be valuable. They want sophisticated algorithms and technical indicators and secret insights that require special knowledge to understand. They want the illusion of sophistication, the feeling that they're doing something complex and impressive. But markets don't reward sophistication. They never have. They reward discipline, consistency, patience, the boring virtues that anyone can practice, but few actually do. When Munger was young, he made exactly the same mistake. He thought intelligence meant having complex, nuanced opinions about everything. It took him decades of experience and mistakes to learn that the older and wiser you get, the simpler your worldview actually becomes. You realize that most complexity is noise, that the fundamentals are what matter, and the fundamentals are usually quite simple. The irony that makes Munger smile is that everyone says they want to think like Buffett and Munger, but they completely skip the part where these men do almost nothing most of the time. They don't chase hot stocks. They don't try to predict market movements. They don't confuse activity with achievement. They prefer obvious ideas executed patiently over supposedly brilliant theories executed poorly. Here's a secret the investment industry doesn't want you to know. The world's best investors spend far more time reading and thinking than they do buying and selling. That's because they understand something the rest of the investing world doesn't. Decisions compound the same way money does. Make fewer but better decisions, and you win by subtraction, not addition. You win by avoiding mistakes rather than trying to hit home runs constantly. The average investor does exactly the opposite. They collect data like hoarders, accumulating information until they're drowning in it. They mistake complexity for control, believing that if they just analyze enough variables, they can predict outcomes with certainty. They drown in information while starving for actual wisdom. It's genuinely tragic because the best financial system in human history, the American capital market, rewards exactly the behaviors that feel least exciting to practice. The path to real wealth looks like this. Earn consistently through work you're good at. Save consistently by spending less than you make. Invest rationally in things you understand. Wait endlessly while compound interest does the heavy lifting. That's the formula. But that formula doesn't sell newsletters or generate clicks or make for exciting television. So instead, the financial media promotes constant noise. 5 stocks to buy now. The next big tech revolution you can't miss. Secrets the billionaires don't want you to know. The real secret the one nobody wants to hear, is that there's no secret. There are just habits that most people are too impatient to practice consistently. If you understand this deeply, you stop treating the market like a puzzle to be solved and start treating it like a partnership between your capital and your character. Because in the end, your investment returns follow your behavior far more closely than they follow your brilliance. Good behavior looks boring from the outside. It looks like nothing is happening. But that's where wealth is actually built, in the space between dramatic decisions. That's why simplicity is genuinely powerful. It removes ego from the equation entirely. It forces you to focus on what actually matters: time, discipline, and basic arithmetic. Simplicity is the highest form of sophistication because it requires the most understanding to embrace. It means knowing exactly what to ignore, which is most of the noise that fills financial media and social media every single day. If you think that sounds too easy, ask yourself why so few people are actually wealthy. Most don't fail because they're stupid or unlucky. They fail because they can't resist making something simple more complicated than it needs to be. So remember this truth. If your investment philosophy fits on a napkin, if you can explain it clearly in 3 sentences, you're probably on the right track. If it requires a 30-slide presentation with charts and graphs to justify, you're probably selling something, mostly to yourself. Keep it simple. That's where the real money is made. Before we wrap up, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We're building a community of rational, patient investors who understand that wealth is built through psychology, not just analysis. In the end, money doesn't change who you are. It just reveals who you've always been, but in high definition, visible to everyone including yourself. If you were disciplined before you had money, wealth amplifies your discipline and allows it to compound. If you were reckless before money arrived, wealth simply gives your recklessness a much larger stage and more expensive consequences. That's the uncomfortable truth most people avoid looking at directly. The psychology of money isn't really about money at all. It's about character, about who you are when nobody's watching and when the stakes are highest. You can't buy rationality at any price. You can't outsource good judgment to an advisor or a system. You can't rent wisdom for a monthly fee. You either earn these qualities through pain and patience, through making mistakes and learning from them, or you remain a permanent student in the school of hard knocks, paying tuition over and over for the same lessons. Munger lived long enough to see all types of investors, brilliant fools who outsmarted themselves, humble winners who stayed rich for decades, envious losers who destroyed their own portfolios, and lucky idiots who mistook a bull market for genius. They all made or lost money for fundamentally the same reason: their temperament, their psychological makeup, their ability or inability to control their emotions under pressure. Markets will always test you. That's their nature and their purpose. They'll tempt you with apparent opportunities when you should be cautious and conservative. They'll terrify you with dramatic declines when you should be calm and maybe even buying. If you don't know who you are before the storm arrives, before the crisis hits and everyone is panicking, you'll find out the hard way when chaos erupts. That's why Munger kept saying your behavior matters more than your brain, more than your IQ or education or analytical skills, because behavior is the bridge between knowledge and results. Most people burn that bridge with emotion before they ever get a chance to cross it. The wise investor accepts that imperfection is permanent, that human nature includes fear and greed and envy that will never completely disappear. You'll never eliminate these forces from your psychology. You just learn to observe them without automatically obeying them, without letting them dictate your decisions. That's what maturity looks like in finance, not certainty about the future, but composure in the present regardless of external circumstances. If you can stay rational when the entire world loses its mind, when headlines scream and friends panic and experts predict doom, You'll eventually own a significant piece of that world. You'll accumulate wealth while others destroy theirs through emotional reactions. The irony of money that Munger discovered over his long life is that once you understand it deeply enough, you actually stop being obsessed with it. You realize that the true purpose of wealth is freedom from worry. Freedom to spend your time as you choose, not display or status or proving anything to anyone. Security matters more than impressing people. Peace of mind is the ultimate dividend, and it's paid only to those who stop confusing appearance with substance, who understand that looking rich and being rich are completely different things. So here's how the psychology of money really works in practice. You learn over time, through experience and mistakes, to detach your self-worth from your net worth. Your value as a human being has nothing to do with your bank balance. You stop reacting to noise, to headlines and hot tips and market panic. You start thinking independently, forming your own views based on facts and logic rather than emotion and social pressure. You make peace with the idea that getting rich slowly is still the fastest way. That actually works for ordinary people. It sounds simple when reduced to a few principles, but it's genuinely the hardest thing in the world to practice consistently over decades. It requires you to win a war not against the market, or the economy, or your neighbor's success, but against yourself, against your own worst impulses and emotional reactions. That's the war most people never even realize they're fighting until they've already lost it, until they're looking back at decades of financial decisions wondering why they never built the wealth they intended to build. So if you take just one lesson from a long life spent watching fortunes made and lost, watching brilliant people fail spectacularly, and ordinary people succeed beyond all expectations, let it be this profound truth. The market isn't your enemy. The economy isn't your enemy. Luck isn't your enemy. Your neighbor's success definitely isn't your enemy. Your own psychology is the only real enemy you'll ever face in investing. Control it, understand it, work with it rather than fighting against it, and you never need luck. You'll have something far more valuable and sustainable, the temperament to survive anything. The market throws at you and eventually thrive regardless of external circumstances. That's the real secret to wealth. That's what Charlie Munger spent a lifetime trying to teach anyone willing to listen. Thanks for watching. If this changed how you think about money even slightly, subscribe now and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Financial wisdom compounds just like money does, but only if you actually apply it. See you in the next one.